You know, usually when we read the gospel, we always ask everyone to go ahead and stand up. This morning, let's go ahead and give our bodies and our minds a rest. Let's be seated and turn our hearts to God. We're reading from Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. They have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and make a show with lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came in and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more in the treasury than all the others. They gave out of all of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
It's only happened to me a couple of times in my ministry, and I've been in the ministry for a long time. It happened when I was serving at Asbury in Lafayette, and it happened when I was serving at Lee Joyner Memorial up in Monroe. That the time came for the offering in the service, and I stood up and said, "The ushers will now come for the morning offering." And the ushers in the back did something like this. I said, "What?" And they basically said, "We don't have the offering plates. We can't find them." They couldn't find the offering plates. Now, as a senior pastor of the church, I have to tell you, we have to pick up an offering every Sunday morning in order to pay the bills during the week. We have to do it. So it was so awkward with them in the back saying, "We don't have any plates, and it's time for the offering to take place." So we were communicating like this, and I said, "Well, do you think you can find something to pick up the offering?" And they said yes, and they got some boxes. And that's what we used for the offering. What had happened in each case, there was a wedding the night before, and the offering plates were moved and not returned to their proper place, and so we had no idea where the offering plates were. But those were 2 offerings that I will never forget because it was so awkward, and we picked up the collection on those mornings with empty boxes. There's another offering that's been remembered historically and talked about for 2,000 years. It's found in the Gospel of Mark and in the Gospel of Luke. It's our scripture reading for today. And I think it's just a marvelous story for us to think about on the Sunday before Commitment Sunday. On this particular day, Jesus and his 12 disciples had gone to the temple. They were in this incredible, magnificent temple that was built by King Herod the Great. And they're observing and watching what was going on. I want us to try to picture and imagine that scene as it took place in the temple that day. All these people, hundreds of people, are coming and going that day. Jesus and his friends are there, and they're actually watching several people come by, and they watch people put money into the offering boxes. Some people that day are putting huge amounts of money. They continue watching. An older widow comes by. Very slowly, she came up to the box, and she put inside the box 2 copper coins, 2 mites, M-I-T-E-S. That coin was called a lepton, L-E-P-T-O-N, which means a thin one. That coin was the very smallest of all the coins. She put those 2 coins, and then she walked away. Now, in reading this story and thinking about this story, I find this amazing. That Jesus, with hundreds of people all around, noticed this person. Of all the people who were there, he noticed her. All the priests who were there, with their flowing, magnificent robes and outfits and all their power, he noticed her. All the teachers with their influence, all the families, all the people who were coming and going, but he noticed her. A poor old widow, all by herself, but Jesus noticed her. He didn't look past her to someone else. He paid attention to her. Nobody else paid attention to her, but the Lord did. I just wonder this morning in this worship center, does somebody here today feel passed by? You feel like you're lost in the crowd. kind of looked over or pushed aside, or that nobody really cares. I want to tell you this morning that according to the gospel, there is someone who will never pass you by. There is someone who does notice you and pays attention. His name is Jesus. That day in the temple, he made a comment to his friends. He said, I want to tell you that this poor widow put more in the offering box than all the others. For the others put in what they had to spare of their riches, but she, poor as she is, put in all she had. She gave all that she had to live on. I want us to think for a few minutes today about this greatest gift that was given that day in the temple, the widow's mite. First of all, this amazing story from the Gospel of St. Mark tells us very clearly that our giving to the Lord, our stewardship, is noticed by Jesus. According to the story, Jesus watches. He notices. That day in the temple, he sat there and he watched the giving. He noticed. I heard a story several years ago about a famous preacher who did something pretty strange in the worship service. It was time that day for the offering to take place, and the ushers came up and started passing the plates. And that preacher left the pulpit, and he walked up and down the aisles of the church, and he watched as the offering plates went all around. Now, how awkward would that be for me to leave the pulpit and to go follow the offering plates all around the congregation to see who is giving? Then after he did that, the pastor came back to the pulpit, and he preached on our topic for today, and he made this good point. God observes our giving. On that day in the temple, he was right there, and Jesus observed those who gave. And I just believe this. Our giving, our stewardship is noticed by the Lord. He sees, he knows, he watches, because God understands that our giving comes from the heart, and it says something about us. A second observation in our scripture reading for today, our faithfulness, our stewardship is evaluated by God. It's kind of shocking to some people, but it's true. Jesus talked more about money than almost any other subject. He talked more about money than he did about prayer and heaven and hell and baptism, because he understood the power of money in our lives. You know, this dollar is very seductive to us. It really is. A lot of people today lose their way because they love this dollar more than they love Christ. The Apostle Paul said, the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, sometimes people misunderstand that verse and they think Paul is saying money is the root of all evil. That's not what he said. He said love of money is the root of all evil. Be careful with loving the dollar. I came across a story that I like some time ago about a car salesman who was in the market of selling cars, and he sold a car to an old farmer. The farmer checked out the price of the car, and he was happy to find out the car only cost $11,000. So he was fired up, and he said, okay, I'm going to buy that car. But then he was told, well, wait, hold on just a minute. There are a few extra charges have to be included. For example, we have a two-tone exterior, $200. Leather seats, genuine cowhide, $600. Automatic transmission, $2,000. Air conditioning, $1,500. Electric windows and seats, $1,800. By the time everything was added up, it was over $19,000. Well, the farmer wasn't very happy about this, but he bought the car, but he didn't forget the experience. A couple of months later, the salesman said to himself, I want to buy a cow. So he came out to see the farmer, and the farmer said, well, I have the perfect cow for you. It's a bargain price. The man said, how much? He said, $200. Man, great, I'll take it. The farmer said, wait, hold on just a minute. We have to figure out just a few additional things. The standard cow was $200, but there's some extras. Two-tone exterior, $45. Extra stomach, $75. Produce storage compartment, $60. 4 dispensing spigots, $10 each. genuine cowhide exterior, $125, automatic fly swatter, $25, and dual horns, $25, for a total of $595. I like that story. Sometimes today we get hooked and we get trapped by things. The widow in our gospel reading for today was not hooked. She was not afraid to give and to sacrifice. Now, actually, as we think about it, her gift was not very much, but to her, it was everything. It was 2 mites, 2 leptons, 2 copper coins. I looked it up this past week. Back then, her gift was the value of a day's wages divided by 64. So today, let's say somebody is making $10 an hour and works for 8 hours. That would be $80 divided by 64, comes out to $1.25. That's what she gave, $1.25. And that was all she had in the world. But that was her gift. Well, that day in the temple, Jesus noticed and he evaluated, and above everyone else, he praised her. He praised her. Now, apparently for Jesus, it's not the amount that we give, because her gift was really small, but it's about the sacrifice that we make. So here's a question that I have to ask myself. As I give to the work of God's kingdom here at First United Methodist Church, am I giving out of my abundance, out of what I can spare, or is my giving a sacrifice? Something that hurts just a little bit. I have to say this, that type of giving has to be learned. That type of giving has to be taught to our children and our grandchildren. I read a good story some time ago about John D. Rockefeller Sr. In the late 1800s and the early 1900s, he was the wealthiest man in the United States. John D. Rockefeller was a Baptist. Somebody asked him one day if he was a tither, if he gave 10% of his income to the church. He answered by saying, "Yes, I tithe." And I want to tell you how it started. When I was a young boy, I had to work to support my mother. The very first job that I had paid me $1.50. I got that first check, and I brought it home, and I gave it to my mother. She held that money in her hands. She looked into my eyes and said, "Son, I would be so proud of you if you gave a tenth, that's 15 cents of $1.50, to the Lord." John D. Rockefeller said that day, "I gave 10% of my very first paycheck to God, and I have tithed every dollar for the rest of my life." And then he said these words, "I don't believe that I could have given 10% of my first million if I had not first tithed that $1.50. That's why it's so important for all of our kids and our youth here at First United Methodist Church to fill out a commitment card and to make a pledge to the church. I want you to know that as the senior pastor here, I get so encouraged when I see a 9th grader who fills out a commitment card and says, "I will give $2 to the church every week," and he or she signs their name. To see a 7th grader who turns it in that says, "I will give $1 to the church every week. I'm signing my name. The church can count on me." To see a child who's 7 or 8 years old who turns in a card that says, "I will give 50 cents to the church every week." Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young had a great old song with the words, "Teach your children well." So here at First United Methodist Church, let's teach our children at the church to be givers. Jesus said, "I tell you that this poor widow put more in the offering box than all the others." A pastor in Tennessee talked about his father, who was a pastor. His dad was very concerned about an old widow in his church who had no income except for her Social Security check. But she always gave 10% of that check every month to the church. So the pastor went to see her, and he said, "My dear friend, I know that things are difficult financially. If tithing is not possible for you, I just want you to know I really understand." And she frowned and said, "Pastor, when I consider all that God has done for me, the very least that I can do is give 10% back to him, and I wish that I could give more. I have a check in my hand right now for the church, and if you won't take it there for me, I'll find someone else who will. And he said, yes, ma'am. And he got the check. And he promised God that he would never say anything like that again. The Lord notices, he evaluates our giving, and a third observation from our gospel reading. That day in the temple, Jesus Christ praised the gift of that poor old woman. And I just believe today, deep in my heart, that God smiles upon those who give and sacrifice and serve because they love the Lord and they love the church and they want to see the church grow and the Word of God preached. William Henson was the pastor of the First United Methodist Church in Houston. He told about going to visit a church in Bristol, England. On his way to that church, he passed a small Methodist church. Only a handful of people were going into its doors. He didn't see anybody going into that church who was under the age of 65 or 70. He couldn't help it. He asked the question of his guide. He said, where are the children? Where are the young people in this church? And the guide said, they're not there. Young people don't go to our churches. Only a very few, if any, because the church has nothing for them. There are no programs for children, no programs for our young people. They're not there because the church has nothing for them. Man, what a tragic thing. I know some people here at this church give to the church for this reason. They don't want our church to be like that church in Bristol. They want something for children here, something for youth here. They want a future. And I thank God for that. An old bishop in the church talked about a conversation that was going on between two men. The first man had the unpleasant task of asking the other guy for his commitment card, for his pledge to the church. The man frowned and he said, man, the church is always wanting money. It's always money, money, money. The answer of his friend was pretty powerful. He said, my son was a little boy, and he was very expensive. He always wanted boots and shoes and socks and clothes, and he wore them out fast. And the older he grew, I had to spend a lot of money on him. However, he hasn't cost me a single penny for almost a year. Why is that? Inquired his buddy. He died. Yes, said the bishop. A live church is always in need. Think about those words. A live church is always in need. I'm so thankful that this church is alive and well and growing. This church is active. Thank God this church always has a need. Next Sunday is our Commitment Sunday here at First United Methodist Church, a very important Sunday for us, a day that we have an opportunity to stand up for Christ and to say, here I am, Lord, send me. I'd like for all of us to find this morning in our bulletin the tithing card. It looks like this. If you would find that. The biblical standard for giving is 10% of our income. I want to encourage us to hold on to that card and to pray about it. This is between you and God. Pray about it, to sign it, to keep that card with us in the coming year. Keep it in a place that you'll see it, in our Bible, in our checkbook, on our desk, on the kitchen table. If you're not tithing, as Connie said at the start, take a step towards tithing. Say, I'm going to do 1% this year or 2%. Take steps in that direction. But join with me in praying and imagine all the difference it would make in our church if all of us here today would tithe. Imagine what a difference it would make in our community and perhaps even in the world if all of us would step up to that. A live church is always in need. Thank God.